Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Chat and Learn. I am thrilled to be here with all of you and to see so many new names on the participants list, as well as some familiar ones. So welcome back. It's great to have you here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauren, and I am the Senior Manager of Marketing and Community at Power to Fly. We host these chats almost every single day about a different topic with a different thought leader in a different industry. So there's always something going on to help you level up your career, learn a new skill, or just virtually network with one another and really find out what's going on in the professional world, all the cool things that you can kind of get into. So selfishly, I'm very excited for today's chat. At Power to Fly, we are all totally remote. So this is definitely a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And we have an absolutely incredible speaker with a really impressive background to kind of share her knowledge with all of you. I'm going to introduce her in just 1 second. So hang tight with me because I think you're all going to really appreciate this. But before we dive into the actual content today, I want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. So one, I'm seeing some more cameras turn on. Feel free to turn on your camera. Like I just said, the point of this session is to really virtually network with one another, to not only learn from Sacha, who's our speaker, but to learn from each other, to take away some tips and tricks that you can bring to your organization, and of course, meet and greet and hear from others' experiences. So turn those cameras on. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions or follow-up questions or stories that you would like to share. And if you're in a place where you can't turn your camera on, the chat is open. So I will be monitoring that as we go and bringing up questions to Sacha as we go along. But definitely participate if you can. We're also recording today's session. So if you miss anything or if you're tuning in a little bit late, don't worry. I will be sending out an email with any of the resources that Sacha mentions. Oh my goodness, my tongue is tied. Resources that Sacha mentions in a follow-up email along with a link to the recording. So with that being said, I really don't want you to be multitasking right now and taking notes or, trying to copy what Sacha is saying anywhere. Just actively engage in this conversation, and then you can rewatch it again later, and then take your notes and do your follow-up. But without further ado, I am so thrilled to welcome Sacha to the Chat and Learn stage. Thank you so much for being here with us. I am so excited to talk with you about this topic and would love for you to share your amazing background with the audience. So Sacha, I am going to hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for sharing the next hour with me. I'm calling in from the Philadelphia suburbs where it's been hot and sticky for the past couple of days. And so Lauren, you are going to be controlling the deck, right? So
yes,
I'll tell you when to flash ahead. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a background on my story just to set context for the session today. And then I know Lauren's pulled together some of the questions that were pre-populated before. So we're going to go through that. And then, as Lauren said, feel free to interrupt, pipe in through the chat, through your audio, and I can answer questions as we go as well. So Lauren, I'll have you go to the next slide. So just a couple of visuals here. So a little bit of my background. So I'm actually a marketer by trade. So do we have any other marketers in the group? I'd seen a couple people in the chat say that they were digital marketers.
Yeah, I see some writers, digital marketing, yeah.
A couple marketers. So I actually started agency side. I started at a small agency here in the Philadelphia suburbs, and then I moved to a much bigger agency called Goodby Silverstein and Partners that's based in the San Francisco Bay Area. They had a couple of Super Bowl commercials this last Super Bowl, the Michael Bublé bubbly spot, that play on words, that was one of the commercials that they did. I was in account management for a while, agency side. Then I moved client side. I moved to the Clorox company, and they're headquartered in Oakland, California, which I know we have at least one person from Oakland on the call. And I spent 14 years there doing brand marketing work, doing new product innovation work, doing a sales role. And I worked on some of the US's most beloved brands. You can see a couple of them here that I worked on. Not everybody understands that Clorox owns a ton of brands that you wouldn't expect. So for example, we even own Burt's Bees. Clorox owns Burt's Bees. It's based in North Carolina, as that office site is in North Carolina. And then most recently, I left to start my own company. So now I am the founder, lead consultant at Virtual Work Insider. And it's a consultancy that helps to coach teams and executives on how to lead in a virtual and a geographically distributed work environment. So let me tell you a little bit about my remote work story before we get into the Q&A. And that story starts with Nevin. This is my daughter. She's almost 10 now, but this was back in 2009, she was born. And I had been working for Clorox for 6 years out of Oakland headquarters. And Nevin was born when we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. And she was sleeping in a pack and play, and we'd move her into the closet for some nights or into the bedroom. And what was happening, though, that first year of her life is we were spending so much time traveling back and forth to the East Coast, where I'm from and where my husband's from, that it caused us my husband and I, to have a conversation about what did we want for the future of our family. Lauren, you can go to the next slide. So this was my commute back and forth with baby in hand, and for the women there, it's not always fun to be on a flight by yourself with a baby. So my husband and I talked about, do we want to stay in the Bay Area where our careers were, or do we want to move back to the Philadelphia area to be closer to family? And for us, the priority was family. We wanted our kids to be able to grow up near their grandparents. And at the time, I thought that meant that I was going to have to leave the job I loved. I loved the company culture at Clorox. I loved my teams. I loved the work I was doing. And so at first I thought I was going to have to find a new job in Philly. And then I had a bold idea, which was to ask if I could do the job from Philadelphia. And again, this was back in 2010. So this was pretty unheard of at the time in the consumer packaged goods industry. It was unheard of to have a role like I had, which was leading new product innovation teams at the time. Clorox, it was unheard of at Clorox within the marketing function. And I had a really good rapport with my chief marketing officer and some other senior leaders who said, okay, we'll let you be an experiment for us, and we'll let you do the job from the other side of the country and see how this goes. But it wasn't without trade-offs. And I'm sure that a lot of you are experiencing this right now if you're thinking about trying to go remote in your current role. At the time, back 2010, I was told, yes, we're going to let you be this experiment, but we don't foresee you ever getting promoted because we foresee all the senior leader roles having to be here in headquarters. We see you moving from a high potential employee to a low potential employee, not because of your skill set, but again, because we don't see that a senior leadership role not being here in headquarters. And there's some roles that you just won't be able to do from afar. And those roles, they happen to be the most important roles and the most, coveted roles within marketing here. Right. So at the time, I said, okay, just get me back to Philly. And in my head, I was thinking I'll show you, right? Just you wait. So what ended up happening was a short experiment. I thought, maybe this would be 3 months. Maybe I'd find a new job in Philly. Turned into 8 years of me leading large geographically distributed teams from Philadelphia. So you can go to the next slide, Lauren. So this is a picture of one of the last teams that I ran at Clorox. The majority of the team was located in the Oakland office, so that conference room that you see there. But by this point, things had evolved within the company. So we had several other fully remote workers as well. And we had people who just happened to be working from home that day. Their kid might have had a doctor's appointment or something else. But I was leading a team that was responsible for $250 million worth of business. I was sitting on a leadership team that was responsible for $1 billion of business for the company. So things had dramatically evolved from 2010 until I left in 2018. But it was slow change. You know, we'll get into this as we answer some of your questions today. It was a slow evolution of change, but it can happen. And it's something that you know, I loved being able to initiate that change in the company. And one other piece of that story, if you go to the next slide, is what I realized is that a lot of what I was learning when I first went fully remote back in 2010, I was relearning how to do everything from a distance. But a lot of what I was learning was now becoming applicable to 95% of the company because we have become so geographically distributed. So I mentioned earlier, we bought Burt's Bees, right? That's in North Carolina. They weren't moving everybody in North Carolina out to Oakland, California. We had bought other companies located in Florida. We had sales offices servicing Walmart in Arkansas and Minneapolis for Target. So we were already a geographically distributed organization. And what ended up happening was about the first year when I was fully remote, I was looking for community. I was looking to find other people who were who were having the same situation as me throughout the company and other functions. And so I started to find a couple fully remote people here and there, maybe in IT or supply chain. And we started getting together and trading secrets about, you know, how do you do this? How do you do that? And then we formalized into an employee resource group. But really quickly, I had people reaching out to me from the Oakland headquarters, from our huge R&D facility in Pleasanton, California, and say, hey, can I join your group? And I'd say, why do you want to join our group? And they'd say, well, I'm working with people all day long who aren't in the office with me. I want to learn those skills. And that's what started me on my journey within Clorox of building out this employee resource group that ended up having over 750 employees or employee members, and me, you know, helping to teach the skills to work remotely or work virtually to this group, and then also helping to initiate that culture change that we just talked about with the C-suite, because these employee resource groups have a direct line up to the executive committee. And so it enabled me to be able to speak to them about what the future of work was looking like and how the company needed to evolve. So that's my story in a nutshell. Lauren, I don't know if you want to now, I was going to ask a little bit about the audience that we have here and then jump into Q&A. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I hope everyone, I can see some comments in the chat, you know, Sacha, your story is just so impressive. And I love that you kind of took the, you know, let me show you approach, because I mean, I don't know anyone that has really transformed such a huge organization like you have. And the tips that you have are really great. So I encourage everyone to really take what Sacha's saying and run with it, because they're really, really great pieces of advice that she's going to share with everyone.
Great. And so to get to know you guys a little bit more, you can either do this through the chat, or I know there's only a couple of people with your video on, so I can see you if you raise your hand. But who is working remotely right now?
Let me see. I might even be able to pop a poll on the screen right now. Hold on.
Fancy.
I know. I've never done this live, so forgive me. Ooh, it might not let me do it live. Oh, I don't think it's gonna let me do it live, team. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. So I have a couple people who are working remotely. Okay. So if you think about it, right, there's this spectrum, right? Fully remote work, and then you'll hear that I use the word virtual work a lot, because I think most of us are working in a virtual environment, which means that we're working with people who are not co-located with us. And usually the exercise that I do, and we're not going to do it here, since I don't think this is going to work, but it is asking questions around, you know, what percentage of your time are you working with people who are not in the same building as you? And this could be internal team, this could be external partners. You know, for me as a marketing director, it was external agency partners. And so, and usually when I do this in a big group, the majority of people are raising their hand that they're spending over 50% of their time working with people who are not co-located with them. Right? Okay, so Mindy, yep. Right, so we're working in a virtual world right now. We are all working virtually. And a lot of companies have not recognized that yet, that they are actually already working virtually. And so as we get into some of these questions around remote work, it actually helps to start thinking about the fact that we're already working in a virtual environment.
And I think that, Elizabeth, what you're asking is exactly what Sacha is saying. So you are in the office right now, but none of the people that you're working with are in that office. So, I mean, in a sense, that is, you know, you're working with people virtually.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's exactly what Sasha's saying. Elizabeth, I'm basically a warm seat in a building. Oh my gosh, that is very funny. Oh, this is great. Great stuff here. So I do want to pop the questions that we have submitted on the screen. Like I was saying to Sacha before, kind of we went live here, we got hundreds of questions. So we weren't able to go through all of them. But I took the ones that were asked many, many times and put them into these two slides. But definitely, like I mentioned before, if you have follow-up questions, if you have questions specific to, you know, your industry or your role or your experience, put them in the chat and I will try to pepper them in as they fit with these submitted questions. But here's the first page and here's the second page. So there's a lot. Hopefully we'll get to as many as possible, but let's dive right in. So our first question here is, what is the most strategic way to present a remote working proposal? What metrics to track, share that show the value of remote working? And then what are the suggested first steps to pioneering a work at home situation?
Yep. And Lauren, I think what we should do too is that there's 2 more pages of questions that are in this vein. So maybe we'll get everybody aware of what those questions are, and I'll kind of answer them in a group because I think they're really related.
Good. So then the next slide is, how do you navigate a workplace that doesn't understand the benefits of working from home and does not seem to be interested in even having a discussion about it? How do you start a remote pilot project in traditional companies? How do you engage people that never considered the remote option? And then the next slide is, how can I negotiate a flexible work schedule when I work for an emerging brand? We are a smaller company and I tend to work in the office a lot of the time alone.
Right. So these are all kind of in that pod of questions around, I want to start remote work at my company, but the company hasn't done it before. They don't seem open to it. It may be a large company that historically has never done it and is slow to change, or like this question here, a smaller company that is not open to it for some reason or other now, right? So here's some thoughts on how to approach those situations. So Lauren, if you go to the next slide. So this dovetails into what we were just talking about, which is first start with seeing if you can frame that the company is already working in virtual teams. Right? So starting from instead of like trying to feel like you're pushing a company to drastically change, start from where you currently are and make awareness of the fact that there's probably virtual work already going on. So there's this spectrum of remoteness where there are some organizations that are still all co-located. I would say they're in the majority now. And I would say like small startups, for example, usually start in an all co-located situation, but as they grow and scale, they need to move into this middle part, which is geographically distributed or hybrid teams. So these are some buzzwords and terms that you might not have heard of before. And then all the way to the other end is what's called the frogs, the fully remote organizations, right? So they're also kind of more on the cutting edge, where we've got a lot of startups that are created now fully remote because they don't have to pay for real estate costs. They can get the best talent from anywhere, but they're still in the minority, right? Most companies these days are in this red box in the middle, these geographically distributed or hybrid organizations. So I would start with planting thoughts about, hey, like we're actually already working in a virtual environment. And you can do that through, what I do with my clients is I usually create a visual map that shows all the different offices that the teams are working across, or the external partners and where they're located, because when you're able to visually represent that, a lot of light bulbs and ahas go off. Another way to do this is through HR data. So something I did at Clorox, I was able to access the HR data to be able to cut by location and see by function how many people were not co-located with their manager, because they could even just be between Pleasanton and Oakland, which is a 30-minute drive in California, but that's still a remote and virtual relationship there, right? So think about how you can build that story there. The second area is to understand the concerns and the roadblocks. So why is the company concerned with allowing remote work? And usually it's not the company, usually it is a couple specific people. So if you can figure out who those people are and who those decision makers are and have a conversation with them about the concerns, it really helps, because then you can create a plan for how to overcome those barriers and concerns. And so anytime you want to ask for a flexible work schedule or remote work situation, you need to have a plan. You need to come to them and say, here's how I'm going to make this seamless. And this is how I work with some of my clients one-on-one with this, on helping them to get to a remote work situation by creating that plan. And for my own personal situation, this is exactly what happened. Is after I was remote for a while, and remember I said I was told that I couldn't get promoted or I couldn't get these certain kind of jobs, I was able to sit down with those leaders and ask what the concerns were. And once the concerns actually were brought out into the open, it actually like reduced the fear a little bit, because I was able, for point by point, to be able to say, well, here's how I'd handle that situation. Here's how I've seen others and other companies handle that situation. And it brought the concern level down. So we talked about framing up, you're already a virtual company. We talked about understanding concerns and the roadblocks, coming to them with a plan. The third area, Lauren, if you go to the next slide, is socializing other virtual work success. So for example, companies sometimes will have me come in to talk about my story, because it upends some deeply rooted thoughts about to be a remote worker, you can't be a leader. Actually, Susie Welsh just did an article on this about you can't be a leader if you're remote, and it infuriated me, and I wrote a rebuttal to it, because I like to come in and say, no, like here is what is possible. It is possible to have a big job and not be co-located with the rest of your team, as long as you have the skills in place, the technology tools in place, and the culture to embrace it. I've also used case studies. There are other companies like Dell, for example, who has a great case study about how they've attempted to go 50% remote by 2020, and have actual HR data that will back up the fact that they haven't seen a change in performance. They haven't seen an increase in disciplinary action with employees, right? You hear a lot of that concern about the bad apple, right? Which it doesn't usually come to life in actual situations. And then the other area that I would double down on is again with data, bringing data. So if you go to the next slide, and this was a great piece of research that just came out by ADP Research Institute. They did a huge study on employee engagement over 19,000 global employees. And they looked at engagement in all aspects, but they also looked at it in terms of remote work. And it showed that people who work over 80% of their time fully remotely are the highest engaged employees, right? So I know like employee engagement, huge buzzword right now. Remote work actually helps improve this. I saw this firsthand at Clorox. I was able to influence how we cut our data on our employee engagement survey. And so we were able to see that the highest engaged employees were the ones that were fully remote, even though they were a small percentage, I think somewhere in the like 8 to 15% of employees, but they were the highest engaged. You can find other data in terms of cost savings, productivity, all of that. But again, it's back to your plan, making the business case. What you don't want to do is just say, hey, I want to work remotely, right? So you have to be really thoughtful about how you approach the situation. And then my last two quick tips are plant the seeds early, right? Change takes time. So all these things I just talked through with you, don't expect to do one thing and then the company be like, yes, I planted seeds about me going remote months before I wanted to pull the trigger, right? Planted seeds with different key leaders and then so that they were open to my request once I was ready to make it. And then lastly, think about a pilot situation. You know, in my situation, it was kind of talked about like a 3-month experiment. We were going to check back in after 3 months, see if it was still working. Think about asking to work 1 day a week from home to begin with, right? Bring down the risk, you know, by making it feel small instead of a wholesale change.
That was going to be what I asked you. Have you ever recommended your clients to do like a pilot? Because that's something I've heard time and time again. You know, you have a doctor's appointment that, you know, it's going to take you 30 minutes to travel or commute to work, then 30 minutes to the appointment, then 30 minutes back, then 30 minutes home. You know, if you just worked remotely that one day, you're getting 2 hours back, and that's going to make up for your doctor's appointment time. So I always love hearing how people kind of really quantify. And like you said, the metrics are everything. You know, if you let me work from home this day, I'll save 2 hours. Like, let's try it.
Mm-hmm.
It's always so fascinating. Oh, Kelly says she did that.
Start small.
Cool. Love it. Great questions. So moving on to our next section. And Sasha, you want me to do the same thing? Read all of them?
I think for this next section, let's just do this one page, and then I'll answer this question before moving to the next one.
All right, perfect. So I'm often asked, how do I know you're working and not just goofing off? Some flippant answers try to sneak out my mouth when I'm asked this. I don't blame you, whoever asked. It takes a lot of self-regulation and effort at times not to take this personally. Do you have verbiage that you feel is both effective and non-combative? And then what is the most common objection that you hear from employers?
Yeah, I think we grouped these together because it's kind of in a similar area. So you can go to the next slide here. So first, I blame the media because I think that the media has a terrible portrayal of work from home, right? Because if you Google, you know, photos of working from home, it's usually like trying to multitask with the kids and do the work at the same time, which is like a huge concern that managers and employers have, is that you're not focused on the work, right? And in most cases, this is not the situation, right? Like, we're all adults. We take our responsibilities seriously. And, you know, we know that work from home is not a replacement for dependent care, right? But the media portrays this. There's a commercial that's out there I usually show that shows a guy who's like laying on his couch eating chips and watching TV while on a conference call, right? Like, no, like that is not the usual, you know, work from home situation. So what I first would say is ban the words work from home. I would say rebrand it to working remotely, because there's a little bit less of a stigma attached to that, especially executives, for example, who are traveling a ton. You know, they're working remotely or they're mobile workers during that time, and they're being responsible and responsive and all of that. So it's trying to kind of equate what you're trying to ask to do with that instead of this work from home perception, because for some reason that just, again, media probably is reinforcing that stereotype. And then, you know, I think it gets back to having performance objectives and agreeing to those performance objectives with your manager, right? If you've agreed to those performance objectives and are checking in on them and are delivering them, then that manager shouldn't be making those snide remarks. which gets to another point, which is trust, right? The trust is huge when it comes to a virtual work situation, not just work from home, but virtual work, even if you're working with people in a different location, office location. And so if you're getting those remarks from your manager, I would say kind of reground on the trust and try to rebuild on the trust with that manager to figure out kind of where these questions are coming from. Sometimes it comes from just not, feeling lack of control. The manager, I was the manager of many people remotely over 8 years. And if you're not getting the kind of communication flow that you expect, then you start to get into a panic of like, what's going on? I don't have the information I need, right? So that could be what's prompting it. And then sometimes there is a little bit of jealousy going on too, right? If the person that you're working with is being required to come into the office every day, that could be an underlying factor in that situation.
All such great tips, and I'm loving these conversations in the chat. Becky says time tracking software or devices like Timular can provide data around things too. If you're a billable resource, it's easy to document when you've spent time on client work tasks. Lots of praise for the shift from work from home to work remotely, which I totally agree with. I think that's sometimes they're improperly flopped terms. And I love this from Kristen. It's a huge culture issue. Micromanagers can't get the sense of control they need when you're out of sight. Communication is so important in all of these. I mean, it's important in every job, but even more so in remote work. So that's such a great point. But a lot of questions on how do you deal with that jealousy and the micromanaging issue?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think on the jealousy front, there's a misnomer about a misperception about the work from home and remotely situation. I would say I ended up working 150% or 50% more than I would have in an in-office environment because I had to put things in place to overcome that distance, right? So it's actually not all like, easy to be in a work from home or fully remote situation. And so some of that jealousy is misplaced because there are time zone issues you have to deal with. For example, I worked East Coast with most of my team West Coast, which meant I had late nights. There were so many nights I was on video calls. My husband had to bring in dinner for me, right? I missed bedtime. I missed bath time with the kids. So it's kind of about kind of resetting the situation, because I think the jealousy is coming from a place where they think that you're out sitting by the pool all day, and not actually doing the work. And then the micromanaging piece, I do a whole module on how to work with a remote manager, how to work with remote direct reports. And a lot of it is, and I usually bring both groups together. So I'll have all the managers and the direct reports in the session together. And we talk about setting those communication norms. We talk about how to ask for help and how to know when your direct report needs help. Because what the micromanaging, again, back to what Lauren was saying about communication, it's usually a function of the manager not getting communicated what they needed to be communicated when and how, right? Each person has a different way that they like to be communicated with. And so a lot of the work that I do with the groups is about talking about communication preferences, the communication norms, your availability norms. If you're in different time zones, what the expectation is to be available to your manager in different time zones, and expectation on speed of response for things, right? So if you're an in-office situation, the manager just walks by the group and is able to see what's going on and say, hey, are you working on that thing, right? But then when you're in a virtual team, you have all of these, like a virtual, shower curtain, that's been pulled between you, and you can't kind of peek behind that curtain to see what's going on.
Great tips. I know we're going to dive into a lot of these questions that are popping up now a little bit later in the presentation. So let's dive on to the next batch. So how do I gain trust and buy-in given the recent phenomenon in the private and public sector of abandoning the remote work option / opportunity, i.e. IBM, several federal government agencies, etc.?
Yeah, I think that this it gets back to trust, right? To talk about showing kind of visible progress against objectives. So I remember when Yahoo did this, and Marissa Mayer kind of pulled everybody back into the office. This was a couple of years ago now. And from what I read, that a lot of that had to do with there were multiple employees who had second jobs even. So they weren't being held accountable to their Yahoo job, which meant that there was not objectives being set with their managers and check-ins on progress and things like that. So I think there was a lack of accountability, which then people were taking advantage of. And so I would say in any situation where you have a virtual team or remote work situation, you need to set up that accountability and build that, and then also build that trust with your senior leaders as well. And I don't buy it when these companies say, we're gonna go back and co-locate everybody because that's the way we think that we're gonna be more productive and more innovative. I think it's actually the reason why they're doing it. It's a very public thing that they can do to point to say we're taking action on something, whereas I actually don't think it solves the underlying problem that the company has.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's really a crazy phenomenon, but there's so much data out there. It has to be interpreted properly. Our next question, what are the must-have and good-to-have policies that a company must offer to remote workers?
Yeah, so, every company is going to end up having a different policy based on what their corporate needs are, what their corporate culture is. But I think, again, it's back to objectives, right? And setting clear expectations, right? Getting to, what's my expectation of your work hours, especially if there's a time zone difference. What's my expectation of us getting together in person, right? It's super important in a virtual team to get together in person, especially frequently at first, to develop those relationships and then have an ongoing cadence over time. Back to, again, like setting expectations that you will have, if you're working from home, there will be dependent care, right? You're not going to have your kids interrupting calls, or if you're taking care of your elderly parents, right? To make sure that that's an understood expectation. Expectations about being reachable, right? That back to, like, that's managers' key concern is when I need you, will I be able to get you? And then things like who's going to pay for what. So when it comes to travel, I've seen some companies who pay for travel to headquarters or to meet with their team. I have some companies that say that they won't. There's some companies that will pay for equipment in your home office, a standing desk, for example, or ergonomic chair or printer. There are some companies that will not. And so I think on a case-by-case basis within your company, you should be thinking about these types of things to put into the policy.
And is this something that you negotiate beforehand, before accepting the job in general, or just before going remote in your current position?
Well, the things I was talking about are usually the company itself should have a standard remote work policy. If they're going to allow anybody to work fully remotely, they should already have one of these. That's not always true. And so I would say ask about it if you're about to be hired on as a remote employee. Ask about the remote work policy and see what they have. And then you can ask questions about it or see if they can make special arrangements for you, which is possible, like an alternate work schedule or something like that, that they could adjust for what you have. If they don't have a remote work policy at all and they're hiring you on remotely, I would suggest thinking about getting some of these things in writing as agreements as part of your agreement to work for the company.
Great tips. I'm applying to or for a job that is not listed as remote. Should I put in my cover letter / initial correspondence with the company that I'm looking for a remote position? What should I focus on when searching for remote work in non-remote companies?
Yeah, but I think let's go to one more slide because I think that these all kind of group together.
Oh, yes. How do I negotiate a remote position when offered? Or should I be negotiating this in the first few weeks of working a new job? And then as I'm searching for my next software job, how do I approach the subject of needing to be remote in a way that doesn't shut the door for companies with little remote experience?
Yeah, so this is all around the job hunt, right? So I would first back way up and say, am I a good fit for working remotely? Right? Because again, a lot of people get drawn to it because of the flexibility for it, but it is not for everyone. And I would first start thinking through things like, am I okay with some more isolation, right? So if you're naturally extroverted, you'd have to get used to interacting with people through the video all day. You know, will that be enough for you? Or will you be able to augment that with some external networking in your area? Think about, you know, are you self-motivated enough for this, right? You don't have somebody looking over your shoulder to say, you know, what are you working on today? How are you progressing? Some people just do better with actually being in an in-person environment to stay on track. I also think about, are you a good tech troubleshooter? So this is a huge thing when I went remote, again, back in 2010. Zoom didn't exist. WebEx really wasn't a huge thing back then. You know, I was having to actually work with IT on a daily basis to be like, how am I going to get into this call, and how am I going to share these files? And you have to know how to kind of troubleshoot the audio and the video as you go. And if you're not really comfortable with that stuff, then you might not be a great fit to be fully remote until you learn. So first, you know, okay, well, let's assume you say, yes, I'm a good candidate for remote work. I would say first start with your current job and see if you can go remote, because you are a known entity there, right? If you have a good track record, people are going to be much more willing. If you come with a plan, right, back to what we talked about earlier, if you come with a plan, they're going to be much more willing to maybe do a pilot with you, as we talked about before. Okay, but let's then pretend that, you know, you're a good remote work candidate, but you don't want to try to do a remote job at your existing company. Then I suggest like a two-pronged approach. I think you could go look for remote job listings, right? They're in the minority now, but there are some great job boards like Power to Fly, like Flex Jobs, like Virtual Vocations, right? Where you might be able to find something that fits with what you're looking for that is remote. So obviously try that, but keep looking for jobs that fit what you're looking for, but might not be listed as a remote job, right? Because for some of those jobs, if you get far enough down the path of the interview process, there could be opportunity for you to be asking questions around doing a pilot or working fully remotely. I know there was a question around like, when do you bring this up? So if you must work remotely, like you're not going to take this job unless you're going to work remotely, then I think you should bring it up early on, because you don't want to waste your time or the hiring manager's time. But if you have some flexibility and it's something that it's nice to have or be nice to have down the line, then I suggest you don't bring it up at first. I suggest you use the interview process to learn and listen about what their flexibility is. So I interviewed for a company that has US headquarters, was here in the Philly area. And I did just that. I've been working remotely for Clorox for a long time. And so I was really hesitant to give up that flexibility, but this was a really great job and a good fit with my skill set. And so I asked questions here and there about it, because I realized that the team that I would be leading was actually distributed. There were many people in Europe actually that I'd be working with that weren't in the headquarters in Philadelphia. So I started to ask some questions, and I started to get signals like, like they're not there yet with this remote work thing. Like they're still coming in like at 6 a.m. to make a phone call in the office with Europe, right? And when it came down time to get the offer, I was offered the position. And then that's when I started specifically asking questions around, could I work 1 day a week from home? And the answer ended up being no. And it played heavily into then my decision about whether or not I took the job. So, I would kind of wait until they've shown enough interest in you that you can have those conversations without risking them not, offering you the position.
And that's a really good point, Sasha, and definitely mirrors my experience too before Power to Fly. I interviewed with a ton of companies, remote and non-remote, people who were open to it, people who are not. And it definitely takes some practice, kind of feeling out the questions that, when to ask them, what questions to ask, how to get a good sense of, this company's culture and whether or not they would be a good fit for you to be a remote employee, because that's so important. Like you just mentioned, if they're not going to set you up for success, but just say it's okay, that's not the best place always for you to kind of grow and develop your skills. So definitely taking on some interviews, whether they're just practice or just to get your feet in and asking those questions, I think was really helpful.
Yeah, and back to having a plan. So I'll give you an example. I did one-on-one coaching with a man who was trying to get a job from New York for a software company based out of Mountain View. And we developed a plan that he came to the hiring manager with that said, here's how I would do my job from New York. And he ended up getting the job, and he's one of the first fully remote marketers for that company now. But it's back to having the plan. It's not enough to just say, I want it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I do have a question from the chat, and I don't know if you know this, Sasha, but do you know of any example like master sheets for remote work policies, or where someone can find one?
Let me get back to you on that. There's a woman that I've been in contact with who's actually out of Australia who's been working on something for that, but what she hasn't done yet is adjust everything for the US market. So let me get back to you on that.
Cool. I like it. So our next question here is, how can visibility be maintained when not physically present? What can I make sure I'm doing as a work from remote employee to help me get noticed by higher ups? I like that. Work from remote employee. Mix of both.
Yes. So this is huge. So now we're getting into the portion where we're going to talk about virtual skills training. And this is actually a lot of what I do with Virtual Work Insiders, come into companies and teach the skills on how to do this. And this is a huge skill, which is about how do I influence from a distance. So Lauren, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to, again, take a step back and talk to you guys about what, the virtual leadership success framework that I use. So I developed this, it's super simple, 4 things, but the reason why I felt like I needed to put this on paper was because usually people jump to the technology tools as the thing that helps with virtual leadership. So if I have WebEx, I have Zoom, I'm good, right? I'm able to lead a team. And that's not the case, right? So the technology tools and how to use them, super important, foundational, but you also need these 3 other areas. And so that is expectation setting. So that's thinking about the communication norms we talked about earlier. That's talking about availability norms. How often are we going to be together in person? Business objectives, all of that kind of falls in that blue box. Then there's the relationship building and the culture building piece. Super important, and we're going to touch on this. There's a question in a couple minutes where we'll touch on this, this yellow box area. And then there's the red box area. So these are the virtual skills training. And what ends up happening is if you have a virtual team already that's geographically distributed, or if you have, if you're letting people go remote, which is awesome, companies are not putting in place the structure and the training on these skills to help it go well. And that's what I'm focused on right now. So if you go to the next slide, Lauren, this is an example of soup to nuts, a training program that I'll do. And different training programs are shorter or longer depending on the needs. But getting back to the question around leading and influencing remotely, you can see that's like usually between my month 2, month 3 module there, right? So first we talk about, virtual leadership 101, some foundational areas. Then we talk about virtual meeting success, like how to run a great virtual meeting where you require everybody to be on video would be one of the tips that I use for that. And then we talk about things like effective remote reporting relationships, driving culture, effective virtual brainstorming, engaging remote presentation skills, all of these different tools. So specifically for influencing remotely, that is really key, because a lot of leaders are kind of in-person leaders, right? And they are being impacted by something called distance bias, which is our brain's natural tendency to put more importance on things that are closer to us than those that are further away. And so what you are doing is having to constantly battle against that distance bias to stay top of mind. And in the module that I do on this topic, I talk a lot about the analogy between, as a marketer, between personal branding and marketing yourself to trying to raise, this awareness of yourself over distance. Because it's very similar in that you want to, raise awareness of yourself, constantly be at the top of people's minds from a distance. Then you want to get them to change their behavior to have you in their consideration set when they're making a decision about people in the company or about a business topic. And then you want to kind of inspire this loyalty beyond reason, right? You want to get them to actually seek out your input across the distance. And we go through actually creating a personal virtual influence plan based on mapping out your stakeholders, who are the people that you want to influence, what are their communication preferences, and then I give a bunch of tips for how to do it. And so I'll give you guys one of my favorites, which is an early morning IM or text. So it's something so easy and simple, but so effective, is that if you can, again, raise the awareness of that person you're trying to influence in the morning, and you put out a communication to them, that will actually open up a conversation back to you. It could be something as simple as, how's your morning going? But again, it's a trigger. It brings you top of mind. They might think, oh, Sacha, yes, I meant to tell her something yesterday when I was talking to so-and-so in the hallway. And, I needed to let Sacha know about this. Or it's a trigger for later in the day for them, where something might come up, a new project might come up, and then if you had sent that to your manager, they might say, oh, maybe Sacha would be a good person to put on that project, because again, you've raised your awareness and you've planted that seed for the rest of the day.
That is an awesome tip. I love that. And this whole program is just amazing. So thanks for sharing this with us. This is great.
Sure.
Our next question, I know we only have about 6 minutes left, so try and rapid fire through some of these, but how have you had success building remote team awareness with non-remote team members?
Yeah, so I've seen success in when everybody is trained on, we are all working virtually, and here are the virtual work skills needed for both parties. Because when you're in that hybrid and geographically distributed box that I showed you earlier, that's the hardest, because you have a group that's located in the majority and a group that's located with the minority. And you want to try to get it to an even playing field, but you can't do that unless you have the group that's with the majority actually also understand the dynamic and be willing to put the hand out to kind of bring it back to equal.
I love that. And there were definitely a few questions earlier about people who were concerned when they have some virtual team members, some in-person team members, and what to do like when you feel like you're being left out of the conversation. And I think what you just said with the top of mind messages in the morning, is really important. I'm wondering if you have any other quick tips for that, if you feel like you are really being left out.
Yeah, I think it gets back to the communication norms and high performance team culture I would have that leader of that team actually say that the expectation is that we have good communication flow regardless of where the people are located. And it would take that team actually talking about what is the ways in which we are going to have each other's back and communicate to each other, right? So that you don't have the side conversations that are never getting filtered through the people who are not co-located.
Yeah, I've always had an ally who, if I was ever left out of a meeting, she would always make sure my boss would call me on the virtual call. And that was wonderful, because it happens sometimes, to no fault of anyone. Obviously training would help, but there is that missing dialogue sometimes. Okay, so our company has a strong 2-office setup, but with a growing number of people hired and working remotely, I'm wondering about how to move from all the great cultural activities that happen in the office to being more remote inclusive. And I love this question, so I'm so excited to hear your answer.
Yeah, this question comes up a lot. It's actually a whole module that I teach because it is so important. And I would say it gets back to that leader establishing norms around all activities need to include all locations, right? It's about inclusivity, right? So overcoming that distance bias again to have inclusivity. And so if you go to the next couple slides, I put some pictures in here to illustrate me as a leader. You know, I had this norm with my team, and it was like, if we're celebrating life events like a bridal shower, baby shower, there's going to be a way that people are going to be able to engage in a virtual perspective. Right? So we, you know, everything was video cast, and this was a situation where we were playing bridal shower games, and so the games actually were emailed out to everybody who was calling in remotely as well. Next image shows we would do dance parties as a group, right? This is an example where we had a song going and one person had a dance move, and then the next person had to replicate their dance move and add a dance move. So it can be a little awkward, you know, it's okay for everybody to admit that, but add some creativity and it will feel really fun and inclusive to the whole group. And my last tip on this would be having location diversity. So we always talk about like diversity and inclusion, right? Location diversity in your planning committees when it comes to activities that you're planning with your teams. So often what I see is the people who are planning these events are the ones that are co-located together, and they haven't thought through how to engage people who are not co-located.
Great advice. And this is so fun. We do so many things like this with Power to Fly. We could probably have a whole conversation on remote activities, because it's tough sometimes. Okay, let's try and get 1 or 2 more in here. Being in customer service, the top reason I get for why I can't work from home is collaboration. How do I show collaboration can occur from home?
Yeah, so I would get to what is the collaboration within your industry, right? So each industry, each team, each function probably has a different definition of what collaboration means. In my industry, in CPG, it was often brainstorming, right? You need to be here in person for brainstorming. And I used to push back on that. And I'd say, you know, the company doesn't want to spend money for me to fly out there to write on Post-it notes, right? So there are many ways that you can brainstorm in a virtual environment. There are different technology tools that can help enable that, and also the facilitator has to be comfortable with having people in different locations in order to brainstorm. But collaboration could mean, you know, communication. That could also be the definition for your team. It could mean creating those intersections between people and ideas too. So I think it gets down to, what does collaboration mean? And then coming up with a deliberate plan on how to do that and what tech tools to use to enable it.
Great answer. And that brings us actually right to time. So we missed a couple, but Sacha, this was amazing. Thank you so much for the wonderful information. The slides were incredible. So thank you for sharing some of your personal stories and really just helping us all learn how we can, you know, expand and grow as individuals and hopefully become remote employees, which is always the goal. Is there anything else that you want to add, or, you know, any other final tidbits that we would like to part with?
Thank you for attending today. I know we didn't get to cover everything and have as much back and forth as we had hoped, but if you have any additional questions for me or interested in a training program or talking about virtual work, I also saw a question on the chat around creating a remote affinity groups. If you have interest in that, this is how you can reach me, is on the screen right here, my email address, or through LinkedIn.
Yes, I mean, there are so many questions. This is being recorded, so I know we got a bunch of questions about that. I will send this out to everyone as soon as it downloads on my computer. So give me like a day or so, but thank you all for attending and participating. This was wonderful. And again, thank you, Sacha. I really, really appreciate all the information.
Thanks, everyone.
Yay.
Have a great rest of your day.
Yes, see y'all soon.